Hello and welcome to the Post Café. My name is Corey Tedrow. The Post Café is a place where we get to sit down with various members of the global post-production community and talk with them about what they do and how they do it. And we give them an opportunity to share their experience and insight into the ever-evolving world of post-production. Today's episode is entitled The Changing Role of the Producer, and we are joined by Claire Shanley. She is a producer living and working in New York City. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role as producer and what you are specifically responsible for?
I work mostly in episodic scripted dramas. I'm currently producing a new episodic series. It's a 10-episode first season for HBO. It's created by Julian Fellows, who is the creator and writer of Downton Abbey. What I like about my role is that it's really multifaceted. I'm the department head for post-production. So that is all aspects of post, picture, sound, visual effects, and the creative process is involved in each of those steps. Like most producing, this is creative, this is technical and management. It's all, kind of the fun intersection of all the three. You try to avoid the crashes, so to speak. I work closely with the producers, the DP, the camera department, the line producer, production team, and VFX to really make sure we have a shared understanding of what the show is going to look like, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to sound like when it's finished. And then we say, okay, so if we want it to do that, what tools, what production work, what kind of post work is required to get us there. But also in prep, one of my most important responsibilities is building out the post team. So it's the people curation that I love. A lot of those are collaborative hires. So that's, where I'm working with the showrunners to hire editors that have the right skill set or the right sensibility. From there, we build out the team, the assistant editors, the sound department, and the whole kind of orbit of post. So that's, VFX and getting everybody, really kind of lining up the right team for the show. And then in prep, the only other thing I would say is it's the framework that we use throughout the show. So that's our workflow for dailies, it's our color pipeline, editorial project management, what our protocols are for communicating with VFX, with the lab, with editorial, with sound, all of that. And then the schedule, which is, of course, the thing that controls all of our lives. So when are we delivering? When are cuts going to the studio? How does that all work? Then we move into production, and it's really about we're operationalizing all these great plans, and then we're evaluating, retooling them, making them work, maintaining them. And then when we wrap production, it's funny we're talking today because it's our final day of production. On season 1, so 162 shoot days. And so then we move into this, it's really all eyes on post. And, for a lot of my colleagues, they're like, well, I'm done with that show. And we're like, oh, it's just beginning now, and kind of keeping all the different plates spinning because we have 10 episodes open right now because of the way that we shot the show.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah.
Speaking of as you say, keeping things on track in the schedule, you were supposed to begin production back in March of 2020, 2 days prior to New York shutting down.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
And then you didn't pick up until September.
Correct.
What had to happen in order to start production post-COVID?
Many things. It was it was a challenging process. And I think I couldn't, in some ways, in retrospect, I think I was so with the right people because production mindset is always about dealing with contingencies, right? And so these amazing producers on our team, our great ADs, everybody, we did go through a whole kind of months of saying, okay, what would it look like if we started on this date? What would we have to do? How would we follow these protocols? How would we be shooting? When would we be shooting? Where could we shoot at that point? Because so many places were closed. We were so on the brink of shooting, literally when the shutdown happened, that it was clear we were, in the blocks and ready to take off. And then it was like, no, just wait a minute. There was a lot of study, in terms of like, what are the public health consultations that are going on? What are the latest breakthroughs? How do we understand this virus? What are our best practices for preventing? And all of that, it wasn't just us as a show trying to figure that out. It was amazing to have this incredible infrastructure of an organization that's saying, okay, we're consulting with some of the best and the brightest, and we're understanding how to shoot a show under these circumstances. For people on set, that meant up to 3 times a week testing. For us in post, that means weekly testing. There's a really active and involved contact tracing system. Our crews are segmented into pods. There's a daily kind of check-in system where we have to report whether or not this is kind of standard now in workplaces where people are coming in. A couple things on the show side. We did have, I think I've mentioned to you, our incredible ADs who were constantly reworking and reassessing the schedule to understand how can we shoot, what are our smaller scenes? If we're going to go to the extent that, we're shooting the show, so we are asking actors to remove masks and to work essentially unprotected in an environment. So what are we doing? Both production-wise with logistics, how many people can we have in a room? Who is in that room? How do they protect themselves? What are we doing to keep people comfortable? We're asking them to perform and to be completely, at the top of their game. And how are we going to support them in that process? So the ADs were so integral to that and so thoughtful about how they scheduled things out in consultation with our producers, of course, who were leading the charge with all of that. We also had a COVID department. So that was added to our production team. So we had a former military nurse, someone who's called a COVID production supervisor alongside the nurse. So this is someone who's worked as a production supervisor and understands all the weirdness of making a TV show and could sort of translate and liaise and answer questions in a way that made sense so that people didn't have to explain why they needed to do a color review with 3 people in a room when we're trying to build LUTs. The COVID nurse doesn't care what a LUT is, They just want to understand the protocols that we're undertaking.
So your COVID producer translated for the COVID nurse person, basically.
Basically, yes. And they were a great team. And then we had a whole group of COVID PAs who worked with our testing team. So that was a whole kind of orchestra of amazingness, really thoughtful, really meticulous, and always approaching things with a sensibility of like, how do we accommodate this? Like, we have to do this work. So how are we going to do that in a way that is safe? Before even walking in here into any space together, tested a week in advance, then following, getting into a cadence of testing, as we call it.
That's fascinating. In the credits, there's going to be COVID department and, so most of the folks I've talked to have said, okay, we need to do remote editing, and they've figured out a way to do it, and they've been doing it. You and your editorial team decided it would not work for you. Can you talk a little bit about why?
That we did not do a fully remote workflow. And I think part of it, I should say, is like, that's always the question of remote from what, right? In post in general, I think, when we're on show side, we're already to some degree working remotely because we're rarely near the stages. And often for us in post, the full editorial, VFX sound, finishing teams, we're often not in the same site. We agreed that we all had to be prepared for any situation, really. People might have to work from their homes if there's an incident where someone tests positive in the group, right? We don't want to spread. We want to contact trace. People would have to isolate in that situation. So we did set up posts with RGS as an option. That said, we had some logistical considerations. One is, as people in New York City don't have a lot of physical space. So, and this is a long show, right? So we had, we already had post staffed at the time that the shutdown happened. People signed on for, a 9 to 12 month editorial schedule. During the shutdown, some people were also doing some remote work that they either a show that they were thinking they would finish had continued longer because of the shutdown or other factors. But people had some experience with remote work. So they knew the strains of that as well. Working at home with kids being online for school, and you're trying to upload a cut on your not terrible, but not great home bandwidth is a challenge. Sitting on an Avid setup for 10 plus hours a day in your bedroom is not, those are intense environments. That's, this is again, a function of privilege that we get to have those problems, but there were logistical things about bandwidth and the impact on show work, and also what we were asking of people in the long term. The other piece was that this was first and foremost in the considerations, is that this is the first season of a new show. So it was not a situation where we had an established look and feel and editorial approach. We did not have the main title. We did not know how we were approaching all those things that you figure out in the first time around. And so there was this piece about editors needing to communicate with each other very regularly, assistants needing to be in regular contact about how to organize. Oh, we have a promo pool. We had promo pools already on the show. But like, how are we handling that? What are we doing? Okay, quick conversation. What are we calling this cut when we post it? What's the slate look like? How are we, all of those little things, which you can absolutely handle a lot of that remotely, but a lot of the other pieces, those creative pieces about the sensibility and the approach, just happen much more organically and easily if you can have a socially distanced. Our hallways are very wide here, I would say. And we do have a great kind of funny, like socially distanced hallway check-in where we're all kind of saying, okay, what's going on? How's your cut? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? What we ended up with was mainly on-site for editorial. And not fully in person. We can't have directors in post if they're going to set, because then we're merging pods, right? So we still are using Clearview for our editorial sessions. We're still posting tons of cuts on our system for reviewing cuts, but we're also making the most that we can out of the in-person factor. And it has paid huge dividends, I think.
The one thing that most of the other interviewees I've talked to have said is the thing they miss the most is that organic conversation that comes out of going over a cut together.
Exactly. And, our show is also, it's a historical show, right? It's set in 1882, New York City. So there are all these things that come up because we're all, shocking. We're all kind of nerdy and like to read about the time period and all of this stuff. But it's just so interesting to, to have those conversations in real time to say, oh, the whole storyline of Ida B. Wells' life is so interesting. And at this time, she was writing this thing. And, those kind of things inform how people look at our characters too. So it's been great to have that, to have everybody together.
Does this feel like a very different experience than doing a production pre-COVID?
For me, this was a new show that was going to start at the beginning of COVID. And so, each show is so different in that way. So it's hard for me to say, oh, this is different. It would be interesting to compare with someone who shot 3 episodes before COVID and then picked up production after. I feel like to me, it's all the Gilded Age, and like the Gilded Age season 1 is like, part of, it's part of the COVID experience. It's like, we can't disentangle those, and it'll be interesting to see, what comes next.
Do you see any efficiencies or things that you're doing on this production that you wouldn't be doing otherwise?
I love that flexibility that has come with that. And I do think, we're such an international kind of business in general. And there is the sense, we have 2 of our executive producers are based in London. And so there's been this sense of the connection from the start. But I think I like the way that it's just opened up the sense of possibility. It doesn't have to be as rigid as like, oh, but you're in local 700, but you're an LA local, and that people can't, like those possibilities are just sort of, they're starting to play themselves out in a lot of ways. And I think that is going to kind of crack open the existing paradigms in some way and it'll allow us to be more creative. Whereas before, in a way, especially in the producing role, you're like, well, that's not possible. Is that possible? I don't think that's going to be possible. Okay, moving on to the next thing. So there is a way that I think it will connect us more. And I think that is great. It's, it's always a shame that it took a global pandemic to kind of, free us up in that way. But it's definitely been a positive thing in a lot of ways.
So after working on this production in this post-COVID world, how do you see things evolving for the future?
I think one of the questions that's come up in this past year, possibly, maybe tied to COVID, maybe not, is also just about who are we working with? Where are they? but also what does our business look like in terms of equity and diversity? And I think it's been such a compelling conversation in that way that, maybe it took the disruption of the pandemic to get people to think about that. But I am very hopeful and optimistic about those conversations that are happening, and just a consciousness about who can access this work, how do we open the door for people? And there's a couple programs in New York. The Made in New York program has a post PA training program now, which I think is a great way. Our current post PA is a graduate of that program, and HBO is also doing a post coordinator training program. And it's also for these jobs, I think, there are jobs in post that people don't know exist. I mean, when I knew I loved post, I knew I had found my people, I was editing, I was super into it. I was like, oh, there's all these other roles here separate from the universe of like sitting at a console working on an Avid. And I think that's part of it too. That's a part of opening the doors for people, is so that we have opportunity that people can join us, and I think that's super important to make sure we're advocating for that.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Claire. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and such a obviously busy time and exciting time for you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Corey. I appreciate it. And, just always fun to talk.
And that is it for this episode of the Post Café. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care and be safe out there. Bye-bye.